Hey guys, I didn't feel like editing. I have a lot of videos and not enough space on my phone and motivation because I work like hell. I just worked 56 hours. Oof. Oof. Yeah, so you know what? I am going to make the Epstein video public again because it was dated at the perfect moment. People, like that one guy who commented underneath my video, the comment's still there, saying like best schizo vampire rant ever. Well, it's not really schizo. A lot of people are like, do you really believe in what you talk about? Yes. Yes, I do. Because I'm right. And here's the thing. I said in that video, before the most recent release of the Epstein files, that I knew for a long time that Jeffrey Epstein was still alive. I knew after he supposedly died that he was still alive for many years. There was really nothing I could do about it. Not much at all, that I contacted multiple deities, hired some psychic mediums. There wasn't much, that I could really do with that information, And what's going to start happening is the events that I prophesize in that video are going to start happening one by one. This wasn't just me getting lucky, right? More extraterrestrial activity is on the rise, and things are going to come in step, right? There was actually a prophecy, and, I'm not big about end of the world prophecies, right? And this isn't exactly an end of the world prophecy, but it kind of is a little reminiscent. I can't remember who wrote the book. There was someone, and I believe the 1800s, that proposed that a certain race of extraterrestrials would reveal themselves to the world around the year 2030 something. I don't know, 2039, or was it 29? Can't remember. But, I'll literally type in the description if I remember the book, and I'll mention the year in this video, that is, because I'm going to look it up after I make this video. In hindsight, I should have looked it up before I made this video, right? Derp. But yeah, so I'll leave a link in the description. There's multiple sources to verify this. Jeffrey Epstein's account, his gamer account, Fortnite account, is active, that he made transactions, and that his account is active in Israel, where I said I'm pretty sure he is, he's alive in Israel. Yeah. And here's the thing. It's becoming less and less of a schizo thing to say that the body was fake, because we are now at the point to where technology that wasn't available 20 years ago is available for private use if you have the money. There are masks you can buy to look indistinguishable from someone else, prosthetics that are expert grade, and there are props that are exactly identical in texture, in appearance, in every way, shape, and form for certain movies and shows of someone else's body, right? So you can have them in varying states of mutilation that looks just straight up real, and it's weird that there was so much secrecy around Jeffrey Epstein's body with someone crazy like him, right? Like Jeffrey Dahmer. Like multiple average everyday blokes had access to his body. We have his brain, right? It's in like some university. Whenever some bigwig actually dies, lots of people see the body. It's confirmed, but conveniently not that many people were around his body after his supposed death. And this body was conveniently and quickly incinerated. And I believe his ashes were left at the Epstein section of type of cemetery in, what was it, Florida? I can't remember. Point is, though, that I thought it was pretty obvious that, he was still alive, but, anyways, yeah, I'm going to make that video public again just because it is important. Yeah, I go on quite a few side tangents and it's schizo, but yeah, no, it's good that video was made public, right? before this release, right? Now we have actual evidence that's not just conjecture, because recently, I guess, there were some videos popping up before we had actual evidence that he was still alive, suggesting that maybe he's still alive. And it was all circumstantial evidence, and it just was not convincing, you know? But again, none of this is about Jeffrey Epstein. As I said, the files are a distraction. You know, the files are not important. And also, I'll leave a second link to another disturbing thing in the files, because apparently Jeffrey Epstein and, his associates were eating little girls and little boys and using the code word for child flesh as jerky. And they have a bunch of emails talking about jerky and how they need more jerky. And we need some of this jerky analyzed in a lab. And, yeah, I'll walk this jerky over to Steve's or whatever. Walking jerky over, that's questionable. And then emails about, getting rid of jerky in a giant canister of sulfuric acid, which is, really surprises no one, given that there was a giant mass grave found in New Mexico, not that far from the Epstein Ranch, where a bunch of women and young girls' bones were found, and they called the serial killer the New Mexico bone collector. And they never, to this day, it's considered an active case where, oh man, I forgot, I am even subscribed to this guy, that it's an active case where they assume that the New Mexico bone collector is still alive. Another note that I think is just important, to say on this channel is, sorry to sound like a Christian from the 700s club, but the satanic panic, I don't understand. Most of my friends in the occult seem to think that the satanic panic was just another type of, lie that Christians made up to make witches and pagans look bad, another boogeyman. But what I find weird is, all my friends in the occult community cheer and, yell and, are just happy when the Roman Catholic Church gets exposed for another child trafficking ring. The Roman Catholic Church raping little kids. They seem like, oh, yeah, you could expect this from these kind of people. And I agree, you can expect that from these kind of people, right? But then there's like an infallibility, an ironic infallibility they associate with satanic beliefs, even though satanic beliefs are not their own. A lot of these people are like, yep, the satanic panic, Satan's another boogeyman. And a lot of them themselves aren't even fully affiliated with the left-hand path. Some of them are, and I could get this defensiveness the same way Catholics get defensive. But I always hear from my friends, always believe the children. Always believe the children. The children are always right. But then yet when it comes to the satanic panic that happened, when everyone was like, oh, our kids are going to go to hell for playing D&D and board games and things like that. What I find interesting was there were multiple verified accounts from children all across the Pacific Southwest of being left at daycares, the daycare workers taking them over the border of Mexico, where strange men would do rituals in front of them and use their orifices and smash baby kittens and baby puppies' brains in with a hammer in front of them. They were raping kids and, smashing their brains in, right? And now that we know that the Jeffrey Epstein thing is a gigantic pedophilia network in the United States of rich narcissistic elites, right? That if you told anyone this like 10 years ago, they would genuinely consider calling someone to get you 302'd. And now it's just so out there, right? Your optimism has been ultimately destroyed. So what I find weird is it's believable that there is a gigantic coalition of elitists that rape and apparently, now that that's been revealed, eat children. And yet, what, Satanists can't have ritual child rings? That makes no sense to me, especially when you consider that, Satanism, as is descended from Anton LaVey and also darker theistic practices, is that it revolves, for at least the secular version, for Anton LaVey, that it's just a stripped away version of American Christian conservatism, which is already pedophilic, right? I mean, people like Charlie Kirk, for instance, when he was alive, basically being pro-life, ignoring the fact that pedophilia is a genetic thing and that baby pedophiles are born, and pedophiles often spread their kind through raping children, and having these types of pro-life laws in place only benefit pedophiles. You're going to force a little girl to give birth to her father's rape baby or some stranger's rape baby or whatever, and then you're just going to be like, yep, this is that baby's life matters. Yeah, but fuck that little girl's twat, right? Sorry to sound so vulgar, but that's, what kind of message are you really sending, right? And they're not even socialists, so they don't have the luxury of being like, oh, well, the state will provide for you. No, we're just going to have you raise this child with no future. And, their life is only so valuable up until the point to where they can be recruited into the U.S. Army to be sent to some Middle Eastern country to die for blood money, right? To die for oil, That's the conservative mindset. Conservatism, the thing no one talks about, conservatism is not Christianity. Conservatism is market liberalism, which upholds a materialistic an individualistic view of the universe, where the individual is greater than God. And you constantly hear conservatives talking about individuality and the unregulated market and referring to people like they're cattle and, basically, thumping their Bible while also basically, ironically enough, preaching no gods, no masters. And putting themselves at the center of everything, A social Darwinism I don't agree with, and it's just radical individuality that uses Christianity as an aesthetic facade. It's basically Ayn Rand objectivism, or, technically a more structured version of, what was his name? Ron Paul libertarianism of the Libertarian Party, not traditional libertarianism. It's market liberalism. It's a material individualistic worldview that has capital, has money at the center of their worldview, right? And even when they talk about the Bible, they break apostolic tradition. I have listened to Orthodox priests and old hardcore Roman Catholic priests talk about the apostolic faith and how Christianity has been taught for over 2,000 years, right? And I say hardcore Catholics because the vast majority of Catholics that actually care about their faith are conservatives. And I'm not talking about politicians, I'm talking about the followers, right? Whereas, most conservatives that don't care about their faith are Protestants, right? But the Orthodox, they're neither conservative nor liberal. They follow an unchanged Christian tradition. Oh yeah, and recently, and I'll leave a link for that too if I can find it. It was revealed, maybe it wasn't recent, that the CIA influenced evangelical activities in the United States, as a means to control people. It's a material worldview that's meant to benefit, people that are alone and isolated, that thrive on antisocial behavior. And then, Trump and all the other conservatives start to make a little more sense, right? But yeah, if conservatism is Ayn Rand objectivism, if it is a secret form of postmodernism, following the legacy of Michel Foucault, where you kind of make up your own reality, right? But, point I was trying to make earlier, whenever you hear conservatives talk about their faith, they basically use the Bible as a way to justify greed, whereas, the Bible itself and apostolic tradition uses its tradition to warn against greed, right? These are parasites. They're coin-clipping grubs that have no sense of dignity or decency. They have no shame, right? And, So if it is, if conservatism, especially American conservatism and its evangelical association, is a form of individualism, of materialism, market liberalism, if they do economically what, stereotypical progressive liberals do socially, which, liberals, social liberals, replace an objective worldview centered around God and creation or whatever, nationhood, purpose, something greater. They replace it with the rights of groups. And because there is no common identity, whether that's race, civic title or God or whatever, right? Because there's none of that, because there's no, putting aside your own personal things for the greater group, they basically have no basis to work off of other than a subjective feeling of compassion, and then they divide and conquer, and they create a virtue or a currency of virtue, where the social capitalist transaction is people's identities and lives, and they further socially divide people against each other because their worldview of ethics and equality is a materialistic one devoid of any higher reality. So they divide people with materialistic identities rather than an identity that is metaphysical and surpasses material identity, right? But yeah, no, the conservatives are basically members of the left-hand path. And I'm sorry to say that, but that's what it is. And Anton LaVey knew this. He said in the Satanic Bible, that something about the devil being the church's best client and vice versa, right? But he's against them. Well, he's against the aesthetic, right? We need to realize that and this is going to be such a weird fucking take for me to say, that the Church of Satan is an off branch of conservative Christianity, where they remove the religious aesthetic and then they apply just a straight up atheistic individuality, right? It's as if Ayn Rand objectivism grew out of the corpse of a Bible. They leave behind the scripture, but it more or less remains the same, because, Anton LaVey would be the one to criticize Christians for the way they treat housewives and women, and yet there's photos of him with people's daughters, women that deserve love and kindness, that are naked, dressed up like idiots, and they're having orgies, and they're being fucked by men that don't love them. And even though the Church of Satan has tried to upgrade their sense of social responsibility, when he was around, he basically made it clear that this was an elitist mentality for men, and Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan was basically built off of misogyny, individuality, hedonism, materialism, and that's what the entire worldview revolved around. And he ruined a lot of women's lives, kind of like, conservative Christianity ruined a lot of women's lives. I don't get how people don't see that connection. But on the more theistic level, literally believing that you can become your own God, apotheosis, right? Here's the thing. I believe our morality as a species, regardless of race, comes down to biology. We evolved to be empathetic, communal, selfless. It was a survival strategy for us to die, not necessarily to protect our kids, but to protect other people's kids. We have more instances as humans of us sacrificing ourselves for each other without being held at gunpoint, of our own free will and volition. People that literally will walk outside an embassy and pour kerosene on themselves and light themselves on fire just to create a point that would show up on social media for a few days before disappearing. Their entire life led up to that moment, just so they could prove a point that would be acknowledged for maybe a week at most. We are collective. We are, by our nature, collective. And there is a rot in the human species, right? And this rot has been growing, like staph infection. And, I just think it's important to call it out. We as humans naturally want to be empathetic. We naturally want to be socialist or communal. We don't exist for material. Ancient Germanic kings, these strong, virtuous people that held out against the Romans, they would wear gold bands on their arm, and they would rip them off and toss them into the crowd because traditionally Germanic people were disgusted by worldly things, and they put much more stock in their people, which is also an idea that was transitioned into the Third Reich, where it wasn't fiat currency or gold standard, but where the value of the money of the Reichsmark came in the value of the German man and woman and child. It was a social currency, a social credit, and it was a credit meant to improve people's lives, to put an emphasis that our real value comes in each other and not in a coin, right? And the coin should be a representation of a positive social interaction, And sure, there were some resources that backed the money, but functionally, it was just based off of putting value in each other, right? And that is something that has always existed for the past 10,000 years and probably 100,000 years of humanity, of every religion, race, walk of life, right? We naturally, without outside intervention and weird, creepy elites intervening, we naturally care more about our neighbors than we do ourselves. We naturally care more about our family, our spouses, our children, our friends, and our friends' children than we do our own lives. We naturally care about our tribe and our flags more than we do our own self-preservation. And that's what's made us strong. That's what made us go to the moon, that and our sense of tribalism, us versus them, having a unique identity either racially, civically, or religiously. Human beings by nature, we are tribal isolationists that are socialist, that care about each other. We only care about our tribe, but within our tribe, there is not a single ounce of blood that we wouldn't give for them, and that's the true source of human happiness and well-being, right? So it's funny to think that there are people that unironically think that, in this human life, they can basically forfeit their humanity and, live around a self-imposed morality, one that they figure out alone, disconnected from the objective world, a world of their family, of their community, of their friends, of their peers, their coworkers, that they could be free of a collective social morality, a positive human morality, that they could be free of that they can, as a small part of a greater flame, go off into the void and become a great bonfire. I'm sorry, that's not how that works. Maybe there could be some type of apotheosis if you were a part of a sentient species of individualistic sentient crocodiles, right? That would make more sense. I don't understand the left-hand path. It seems more like antisocial occult dogma to make us, focus more on ourselves and delusions of becoming a higher ascendant being, and basically ignoring each other. And also, even then, most people in this path of the left-hand path, as a black magician, as a Satanist, Luciferian, whatever, and Luciferians tend to be more decent people, mind you, basically, while the vast majority of people won't go on this creepy, fucked up path of hurting people, what a better way to hurt people than to embrace such a belief system. Like, I'm just saying, free from obligation, I'm my own God. You got to imagine how that comes off to, an existentially depressed person that's like Patrick Bateman, right? You have to understand how that would come off to someone like Jeffrey Epstein, right? And again, the individuality in conservative Christianity might be more subtle, but it's still there, and it's easy to take advantage of that, right? It's easy to take advantage of anything that values freedom that values freedom from instead of freedom to. Freedom from obligation. Anything that runs away from obligation towards your community, your unit, it's easier to get away with fucked up shit, right? So but yeah, it's very ironic that I would consider unironic, I guess, that I would consider Anton LaVey's Satanism, an off branch of conservative evangelical Christianity. I know how that sounds, right? Especially given that this man wrote in, what was it, the Satanic Notebook, I think, I can't remember, where he basically said that he doesn't shower or bathe because Christians shower and bathe, and he wants to be contrarian, and he's glad if his smell offends them, right? Again, someone, that is so antisocial that they don't shower and they base a worldview off of that. If the unacceptable becomes acceptable, if we destroy the seals of social norms, we unleash an anti-cosmic chaos into our society, into our psyches, right? And as someone who has always believed in the purity of God, the one true God, the monad, Brahman, the source, the pantheistic all, the creator, preserver, and destroyer, the infinity, right? I gotta say, there's nothing greater than that. And there are people that somehow think that they are greater than that. And I can say, from the perspective of an astral vampire disconnected from source, that I, out of all beings, could not become a god, right? Technically, all of you and your souls that are connected to source are, in a way, God, capital G God, because you're little sprouts on a greater tree. You are a part of the greater soul. So in a way, you are all God, so to speak. But none of you will ever be greater than God, and I'm disconnected from source. And there are vampiric gods, or rather deities, but to call them a god just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. It's like we are a lot of things: predators, leeches. You can call us whatever you want. We're not gods. And this idea of vampiric apotheosis, if it's sympathetic, kind of makes sense. If it's disconnected, I don't see it. I don't get that. Even then, most vampiric deities that have astral vampires like me, where their followers are disconnected from source, their patron gods don't do this to themselves, and that's in order to maintain their godhood, because we need to feed, right? So that's a lot of power that you'd want to build up from source, that you'd want to collect over time without having to use it. So a vampiric god doesn't actually make much sense when you think about it, right? And it's like, I'm here to participate in eternity. I'm here to break the Ouroboros, the life, death, and rebirth, to exist in a purgatory of my own life and enjoy it, to enjoy the pretty sights, right? To neither descend nor ascend, to enjoy life as is. So maybe my perspective is biased, right? But back to the whole satanic thing. Yeah, it's weird to me that my friends in the occult are so anti-satanic panic, and yet there is heaps of evidence that now everyone just dismisses because it's evangelical propaganda, even though these kids were raped, they were molested, many of them committed suicide, many of them grew up and said, no, yeah, it happened to me, no one believes me. Well, yeah, probably because the movement you're associated with is insane, or the movement that rather wants to represent you is insane. But basically, over time, as the social climate changed, we ignored thousands of victims in the United States, in the Western United States, thousands of, former children, because it no longer became socially progressive enough. No, people weren't really conservative Bible thumpers anymore. So because we felt like being more liberal, we basically just ignored literal child rape and satanic rituals, right? So yeah, no, whenever you have anything that's fits the category of Friedrich Nietzsche's the Ubermensch, or anything that fits the category of Michel Foucault's postmodern person, or Ayn Rand's objectivism, you have a recipe for rampant pedophilia and child abuse, right? Some antisocial behavior, which I take part in, and I actively try not to. I try not to be antisocial, you know. I try to balance my vampirism with a human obligation towards my society. It would be so nice to just withdraw from my humanity for some moments, but I know that it's not about me, that I chose to be in a human body. So I have a tribe, I have an obligation, I have a duty, I have an obligation to obey, serve, and conform, you know? But yeah, like there's little bits of antisocial behavior we all partake in, right? But to consciously embrace antisocial behavior creates more antisocial behavior. The more antisocial you are, the more disconnected from everyone else you are. And thus, if you're disconnected from your hive, your social awareness starts to disappear. And then you don't notice when people like Jeffrey Epstein do this shit right in front of you, right? Jeffrey Epstein was not very subtle in hiding this stuff, right? There were many people that could have, if they looked hard enough, realized that this man was apparently eating children and raping children. You know, plenty of people could have realized this, right? But the thing is, people were so withdrawn in themselves. They were so withdrawn in their own individuality, in their own subjective reality, right? In their own antisocial behavior. So, again, you know, you can't do much to stop this, but I would encourage you, you know, to be a little more social. If you have a neighbor that's an old man, and, you know, assuming you're not a young child watching this, I hope you're not, you know, assuming you're old enough to where someone's not going to take advantage of you, because, again, old men can be creepy. But assuming it's a wholesome old man, you really wouldn't know that. So I'm assuming you're an adult, right? Or a teenager that's strong. Either way, you see your old neighbor struggling, or maybe it's an old lady, even better scenario. You know, instead of walking by her every day and watching TikTok and watching Skibbity Toilet and listening to Quandale Dangle and fucking being like 6'7", 6'7", maybe just take a moment, say hi to the old lady. Maybe offer to take out her trash so she doesn't have to walk. You know, be a steward, be a servant. If more people started acting like stewards and servants, a lot more social awareness would come about. If we actively started looking out after each other, it would be kind of easier to see when we're fucking snatching people off the streets and raping them. So that's pretty much all I have to say on that.